Oh, I hear the recording.
Moved a button. So welcome everybody. This is the January, February edition of the Landlord Management series that Brian and I have been hosting for 3 years now. Has it been that long?
Yeah,
It's
it's
been a
actually, I think,
while.
right after
Four
COVID.
years, maybe.
Times flies when you're having fun, Angela. This is exciting stuff every single month.
I know. I know. And I'm Angela Zakowski. I'm the director of the Vermont Landlords Association, and joining me is Brian Armstrong from
Strong
Strong
Will Property
Property.
Management in Keller Williams, Vermont. And Angela, I want to thank you for the work that you put into this because for those of you who may or may not heard, I was at a town meeting last night when Newski dealing with the elimination of no cause. In Well, I may sound like that little boy from Aesop's fable. I'm not crying wolf. I think more than ever before, this is going to be a year to stay engaged, stay
Hmm.
aware, and to speak up for the win between housing providers such as people on the video today or on
Right.
the with us today, win for the residents and win for the towns, because it's going to be an easy environment to focus on quick fixes that really aren't fixes when it comes to housing that usually is affecting our members.
Right. And I think, um, you know, being reasonable and just reiterating that, we're looking for balance. Like we are not looking to just put tenants out in the street without process, right? We need the system to be fair for all parties. And right now it's not fair. And if that just cause goes into effect, it'll be even less fair. So I have a couple things on my agenda, I think, as we're looking ahead to 2025 and what I'm seeing out there currently with about a month under our belts here. So some legislative updates and some court updates, as I think both of those sort of impact each other to some extent. So let's start with legislature and the legislative changes. Um, we did a recap in December, sort of talking about what had happened over the course of the year. But here, a couple of big updates. We didn't get into these nuts and bolts when we were here in December. So the Vermont Senate has 30 seats. We have seen sort of a massive shift for Vermont. So we have our Democrats and Progressive caucus that has 17 seats, and we have our Republican caucus that has 13 seats. And so what this has done is changed that um, House of Congress or House of the legislature from being a supermajority with the ability to override vetoes to ones where folks are going to have to work a lot more collaboratively because they don't have the votes any longer to override vetoes if people are voting party lines, just from a straight numbers game. And so that was a huge pickup. That was like 6 seats that got picked up by the Republican caucus around the state. And I think, part of that sends the message that people are overburdened and they are tired and they are just feeling not heard. I think we're going to focus this on Vermont because that's sort of what my familiarity is with. But I think, we're seeing the message being sent that you're not listening to us um, and that it needs to be a partnership and people need to be working together to solve these problems, not just I'm we're telling you what to do. So I think that's been sort of a big shift that we're going to hopefully see this year. Over on the House side, there's 150 seats in the Vermont House. The Democrats have 87 of those seats. Republicans now have 56 seats. We have four progressives and three independents. So again, we see sort of a similar shift in numbers, which is going to require a lot more cooperation and collaboration in that government entity as well. So I think, there's opportunities here for people to get creative, to find solutions that are going to work for the state. But it's going to require sort of stepping back a number of years and people working together, crossing aisles, not voting something down just because somebody from the other party has, suggested it or recommended it. It's really about what's going to solve these issues for Vermont. And we have some serious issues, right? With money and finances and our school system and how do we pay for emergency housing vouchers. We have a lot of challenges that need to be addressed.
And Angela, and don't hesitate to answer this question later, not at all. Um, are there any key representatives or senators that you think our members should be aware of, that are more influential when it comes to topics regarding landlords and housing?
We're going to get to that.
Thank you. You
Just
rock. Appreciate you.
yes. So one of the things that we've seen with this change in the makeup of the legislature is we have committee changes. So there's there's two main um, committees that housing bills go through. So on the House side, it's the House Committee on General and Housing. We have a new chair over there. So longtime chair Representative Tom Stevens from Waterbury area is no longer at that post. The new chair of that committee is Representative Mark Mahaley. Uh, and there's a number of new members on this committee, and also there's a new committee assistant. And so there's been a lot of changes within this group, and the committee assistant's kind of the gatekeeper, like the person who people communicate with to come in to testify and things. And so it's sort of a wholesale change over there. Um, and so the folks that sit on this committee, those are good people to reach out to, because those are the people that are taking up housing issues and housing policy in on the House side. So that's Representative Mark Mahaley, Representative Ashley Bartley, Representative Emily Krasnow, Representative Elizabeth Burrows, Representative Tom Charlton, Representative Lenora Dodge, Representative Debbie Dolgan, Representative Mary Howard, Representative Sadia Lamont, Representative Joe Parsons, and Representative Gail Pezzo. And though, you can find this information on the legislative website. And I might have some links sort of later on
Yeah, and
as
Angela,
well. But
just
I
as
have put this in past presentations before.
and
So,
thank you for doing that. And to the realtor friends that are on with us today, there is a Vermont Association of Realtors legislative reception tomorrow, late afternoon, early evening. I encourage everybody think about getting down there and talking elbow to elbow with the people that are making the policies. Not that I can guarantee you all those people that Angela just listed are going to be there.
right. Exactly. And then on the Senate side, the committee that deals with housing is the Senate Committee on Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. Again, this committee has a new chair. They have some new members and a new committee assistant as well. So again, like we're seeing sort of lots of changes happening. And the folks that are sitting on this Senate committee is Senator Allison Clarkson. She's the new chair of this committee. Senator Randy Brock, Senator Keisha Ram Hinsdale, Senator Thomas Chittenden, and Senator David Weeks are the members of this particular committee. So again, if any of those folks are your representative or your senator, these are great people to reach out to, but also whoever is your own representative and senators, because if they're hearing from constituents, that gets back to these committee members. They all talk to each other, or most of them talk to each other. So House General, what do we currently see happening in House General? When I put this presentation together yesterday, there were 131 House bills that had been introduced to date. Right before I got on, I checked again, and we're up to 141 bills. So, like in the
Wow.
span of like a day, like 10 new bills got added. As a reminder, we're at the beginning of the biennium, so we work in 2-year legislative cycles here. So this is the beginning of a 2-year cycle, and so bills basically have 2 years to pass. If they don't pass this year, they could be taken up and passed next year as well. So the only housing related bill that's currently before the committee in House General is H38. So this is an act relating to adding new positions to the Human Rights Commission. So this is an ask from the Human Rights Commission to add more investigators. It also has a budget component. I think the last number I saw was that there was a pretty large appropriation that they were asking for, which means this bill would also have to go to appropriations. That's going to be another challenge here, given sort of the monetary issues that the state is facing. But really, like that's it. So there's been a lot of press about different housing bills that we can expect or not expect. I haven't seen any of those yet. And until they get introduced, there's no action that can happen on them. So that's it for bills before the committee. This QR code will take you to the House General page. So that's, you can track what bills are before them. It has the members of all the folks who are on the House General Committee. You can look at their weekly agenda. You can get to the link to watch their live streams because all of their committee meetings are live streamed on YouTube now. So that's will help you get where you need to go to find information. So Senate Economic Development Committee, they currently only have one bill that's related to housing before them. S34, so this is an act relating to lowering the rate of increase for mobile home lot rents. So currently in statute, mobile home lots are subject to rent control. And there's a process that mobile home park owners have to go through every year to put rent increases in place. And this would actually lower the rate for them that they can ask for. So again, this bill has been introduced. Just because something's been introduced doesn't mean it's going to go anywhere. But that's sort of one housing bill that's over on the Senate side. Again, this is a QR code that will get you to the Senate Economic Development page that has all this information, what bills are before the committee, who's on the committee, links to the agenda, and the live stream link if you want to watch specific hearings that they're holding. There's a couple other bills that are, I think, of interest to landlords and housing providers. Both of these bills are in judiciary. They're judiciary committees right now. H21, this is related to service of writs of possession. So currently, statute says that writs of possession have to be served by the sheriff and of the county in which the property is. And so we have seen some challenges around the state with different sheriff's departments having some issues, having personnel issues, having just not a willingness to serve civil process or other papers. And so it's really created some challenges for evictions in some of these counties and for the sheriff's departments themselves, particularly neighboring departments who have had to pick up some slack, but can only go so far because we have the statute that is very specific. So this bill would allow basically any sheriff in the state to serve writs of possession in any county. So it really will help with sort of the court process in some of these places that are having some challenges, which has not been great. There's also a bill that was introduced that's sort of the next round of a criminal justice bill that was passed last year. So tucked into a larger criminal justice bill related to drugs and drug activity, there was a section that said if somebody is not a resident in a rental unit, so they're not the actual lease tenant, and they get arrested for drug activity, the state's attorney can ask for a prohibition for them to come back to that property as sort of a conditions of release or a which helps, right, with some of these drug activity cases that we're seeing and issues that we're seeing. But it's a may, so it says the state's attorney may ask for this thing. H121 changes that may to shall. I don't know that it's getting used, and I think this is the way you force statutes like this to get used, is you take them from sort of discretionary to mandatory. Um, so this 128 changes that language. So it says if you're arrested at a rental unit and you're not a tenant there, conditions of release shall include a requirement that you're not allowed to be back at that property. Um, Again,
Angela, this is, I think, is really important. Again, everybody, I apologize if I sound pontificating. This is going to be really a year to get involved, to advocate, and this is something I would encourage everybody to reach out. Having unfortunately dealt with that, some time ago in some of the properties I own,
mhm.
this is a tool that can really help landlords help the rest of the residents.
Right. Right. And we see this again and again, right? Out-of-state drug dealers or people who don't live in the building, they move in with the residents. Sometimes the residents leave, sometimes they're still there. The unit gets drug bust, people are cited and released, and those folks come right back to the building. Um, this wouldn't prohibit your leased tenant from coming back to the building. It just would uh, place a condition on any other person that shouldn't be in that unit, which is why having written leases who lists out who's supposed to be in that unit are incredibly important in situations like this, because that can be provided to police and the state attorney's office to say, here's who's supposed to be in this unit. All right. What are legislators hearing? This was sort of what are tenant advocates pushing for right now, right? So we've sort of got a preview of that with the landlord tenant law study committee report and testimony that happened with that committee. So tenant advocates are really hammering this just cause eviction protection um, schematic, and they're trying to, push it forward at a statewide level, as opposed to sort of piecemeal municipalities, which have, handful of them have passed just cause charter change requests. The legislature has not taken those up, so they're not in effect. So just cause is one of the pieces that is really being talked about by tenant advocates down there. Um, Rent control, that's another one. They like to refer to it as rent stabilization. Why should tenants face, giant rent increases? Well, it's because everybody's expenses have gone up. But that's another one that I'm hearing again and again. And usually just cause and rent stabilization are being talked about in tandem, and being pushed together because uh, what they want to do is make sure landlords don't do large rent increases to force people out the door because of just cause. So usually you see those in tandem together. I think, rent control has generally been a giant poison pill in the state that most legislators aren't willing to touch, because they get a huge amount of pushback, sort of see that it's not really good for the state. But I'm concerned with this new way they're referring to it, rent stabilization, that, the message that it's essentially rent control could get missed. So that's another one that I'm hearing a lot. Rental registry is still being pushed. I'm sort of neutral about the rental registry. I see upsides to it, I see downsides to it. In sort of the grand scheme of things, that one probably concerns me the least. If the legislature decided to move forward with something along those lines, I know the impediment in the past for that has been the cost, because there is a cost to it. I think the last bill that was introduced was $35 a unit for the registry, and anybody who already was registered with a municipality would not have to re-register at the state level. So it was really to cover those locations where there isn't already a registry and a way to communicate with housing providers. But so those are like sort of the big three that I'm hearing about down there. I know there's other stuff and people have different sort of agendas and topics that they're pushing. But those are the ones that we're seeing um, being pushed as sort of organized effort. So rights and democracy has really been pushing strong on those, with getting people to come down to testify in different settings, and really just sort of having a behind the scenes push on these. So just,
And
to
Angela,
let people know.
if I may, the top two terrify me both as a property owner as well as a as well as a real estate broker. And I encourage, and cut me off if I'm too long-winded today, I encourage everybody to watch these hearings and get down there and testify. And Angela, you and I have talked about this before.
Hmm.
If and when you do, be very, very careful to not demonize the few people that make us concerned about these.
Yep.
But I told stories of, single parents who are buying homes, and property, trying to build a little bit of equity for their kids. I talked to City Winooski about, landlords as housing partners, and there's really small business owners. I also, talked to City Winooski about this is an opportunity for your residents to buy property, and if they don't, because of these things, then you're eventually going to have probably less people on the tax roll to support schools. And I think a big thing that we have to, at least I think we've got to drive home, is all that would be rent control would be fine if the state of Vermont and the city of that we're talking about, and last night was Winooski, would agree to tax control. But
Right.
one building, I had 6 units. I had to raise every unit $100
Yep.
just to break even. And I pointed out to the people of the city that doesn't include the inflation on the wages of the repair people, on the inflation
Right.
of gas, on the cost of trucks, on the. So I'm advocating, cut me off in 10 seconds, but this
Mm-mm.
is stuff we all got to get down and advocate for, while doing it as a win for the residents, a win for
Right.
the communities, and a win for property rights.
Right. And I think, one of the things that gets missed in all of these discussions about just cause is, sort of at its essence, you could say, yeah, that kind of makes sense that people should be able to live someplace, if they're not causing problems or having issues with the neighbors or violating the lease. But in the end, this relationship is a private contract. And so, the two parties have made an arrangement and entered into a contract for a certain amount of time. And that's not forever. Sometimes it is, and sometimes the relationship goes on for a very long period of time. But either party should have the right to end that contract and that agreement for no reason at all. But just due to the fact that the contract is over. And I think, that's a piece that gets missed. The other piece that gets missed is that no cause notices, and I'm sort of talking a little bit with my lawyer hat on right now, though none of this is legal advice, um, is that no cause notices are regularly used to deal with problem tenants who are either terrorizing a building or are just not good neighbors. And maybe they're not good neighbors to the point of it would be enough of a violation to do a breach of lease, or it would require other tenants to testify. And they're either scared or they don't want to get involved. But that no cause notice allows the landlord to send it to the tenant to deal with it themselves. And it also allows that tenant to move forward without a record of the behavior that was happening at that
Yeah.
property. We moved to a just cause sort of schematic, and whatever behavior problems, whatever challenges are happening at that property are going to be front center in a notice. Tenant's not going to be able to get away from it. And it's going to make it even harder for those tenants to find places to go.
Well, I think two things that also come to mind, and you hit it with the phrase rent stabilization. Just cause eviction protections and rent stabilization are really attractive sound bites.
Hmm.
When
Hmm.
in reality, and this is what I encourage our members and people listening, if you go to speak, and I hope you will, remember, I've been told in New Hampshire, 4 to 6 weeks to evict somebody.
Yep.
Florida, 4 weeks. In
Yep.
Vermont, we heard just the last meeting,
Six
six
months.
months if they
That
don't
that's
request a
just
jury trial.
and that's just court process. Like that's not all the notice stuff before you get to court. So and I think that's another important thing is we hear a lot of stories and analogies about just cause has gone into effect in other places. They've passed it. It's been successful. It's fine. I'm here to tell you the eviction process in those jurisdictions looks a lot different than it does here in Vermont. Um, by a lot. And I mean, we're talking summary processes, we're talking, 30 to 60 days from start to finish for a tenant being removed. Sometimes it's even more quick than that. So, we're not comparing apples to apples when we're saying, oh, it went into effect in these other places and it's great and it's worked well. Well, they have a different removal process there than we do here. And so I think, I think it's about balance and it's about choices. And, I, so, but again, get involved,
Yeah.
talk to the folks that have the ability to make these changes or not.
I'm
Um,
ambivalent personally about the rental registry because I think it would provide some uniformity that we don't see right now, which
mhm,
would be helpful to property owners, real estate brokers, buyers, and sellers. On the flip side, what concerns me a little bit is will they fund it appropriately? And
right.
will the inspectors that are doing inspections
Well,
actually have uniform inspections?
well, it was never promoted as a registry and inspection program. So it was just a registry.
Interesting.
So
Yep.
state housing department, the Department of Housing and Community Development would have information about where the rental properties are around the state of Vermont. So in times like when we have flooding or other natural disasters, they have a way to communicate with people when there's new programs that are launched. We saw a lot of this in COVID when there were rental assistance and other programs being launched. How do we reach people? How do we get
Mm-hmm.
landlords to know about this program? Um, where are, when the state does housing needs assessments, where are the rental properties? Like, where do we need more? Where are gaps in our supply and our inventory? And we're missing a lot of data. So the rental registry was always meant to, and at least the last bill was crafted to be more of a data collection um,
Interesting.
platform
Yep.
than anything else. And it, wasn't available to the public. It wasn't like I couldn't subpoena those records. Legal aid couldn't subpoena those records. Like it was, for government use, for planning and notification purposes. But yes, it did come with a cost and a fee and all of that. So, housing providers, I think, my challenge to you is what kind of impact will you have? Are you willing to reach out to your representatives? Are you willing to reach out to your senators and talk to them about these things? You don't have to show up to a committee meeting and testify before the full legislature. This can be a conversation that you have with your elected officials that, are supposed to be representing you in your district where you live. So, what can you do? Brian, you knew we were going to get here, right?
I get so excited. I just can't contain myself sometimes.
I mean, these are all things to discuss with your elected officials, right? Your senators, your representatives at the local level, if they're taking some action, but really at the state level, that's where a lot of this policy is made. Talk to them about the challenges that all of you are facing. And it's not even like I have a bad tenant and it took me months to get them out, right? It can be as straightforward as here's the challenge that I have when my property taxes go up 14% and my insurance for this
Mm-hmm.
property goes up 25%, and the finger's getting pointed at me as the bad guy because I've had to raise my rents to just cover my costs, right? Like there's some education components to here as to, what is happening out there. It's like this stuff happens in a vacuum, and like they can't wrap their head around the fact that when costs go up, that also is going to impact rents and just sort of everything. I just feels like simple math, but I don't know. Um, and I think, here's sort of like a list of, prompts that we have seen are pretty useful and helpful for folks. Like, why do you increase your rents? Like, this seems to be something so basic for those of us that are in the industry and work with this all the time. You'd be surprised the number of people that don't understand what goes into the analysis of why rents go up and why rents are increased. You could talk about what have your expenses done in the last 4 or 5 years. I think, there's a sense of like, oh, well, people know. Well, they're not making that connection
Mm-hmm.
as to what that impact translates into for rental properties. What do your accounts receivable look like over the last few years? How did you weather? What kind of effort did you put into weather the eviction moratorium, tenants not paying rents? And if you didn't have tenants who weren't paying rents, do you have a sense of why that was? What was different about that building or what was different about that
Mhm.
property? Share that, right? That's a success story. What can we all learn from that? Maybe you got really, really lucky, but those do exist out there. What are you seeing in terms of, damage to rental units? What was that impact? I know, again, the attorney hat on, I have seen higher levels of damage to units in the last 3 or 4 years than I have, prior to that. Like whether it's, hoarding or just not cleaning or just intentional damage, I definitely am seeing an uptick in that sort of behavior, sort of at the other end. And that's a cost as well, right? That the landlord bears that the next tenant or a few other tenants in the building end up paying back over time because those costs have to be recuperated. Um,
And tying back to just cause eviction, one of the things that or prohibition, one of the things that I use an example is I once had a hoarder, and yeah, I could maybe prove that it was technically a violation of the lease. But saying to a judge, I want to move this person out just because they have too much stuff is not necessarily the best reason to go to court. And the unfortunate aspect, and you probably agree, Angela, is most of our listeners today would not rent a unit when there is 10 broken down barbecue grills, a refrigerator, the laundry, and so what happens, and as well as I do, I'm sure everybody agrees, if you can't get those people out easily, only people that will want to live with or tolerate a hoarder will live with a hoarder neighbor in our apartment building. And
right.
then this sounds harsh, it infests the entire building.
Right. And you have another layer over the top of sort of that situation, is because hoarding and that sort of behavior is actually intertwined with other mental health issues. And so you have potentially, disability and reasonable
Mm-hmm.
accommodation requests. And it's a very challenging tenant situation to navigate for housing providers. And there's not sort of a straight path through for many of those cases. All right. The big one, if you're talking to folks, keep calm, right? You can't get angry. You can't get upset. You can't, yell at them. Please don't yell at them. Even if you want to, even if they ask, questions that are rude, sometimes they're rude back to you, or they're rude to you. Like that's on them. There's this perception that housing providers are like, angry, table pounding, folks. So don't feed into that. Have a calm conversation. Um, and the last piece, and I think Brian, you were getting to this, is don't say derogatory things about tenants. Like keep the focus on sort of your own experiences, your own challenges, the impact that's had on a building. In the end, it is derogatory towards that particular tenant, but there's a way to present it that's more like just sticking to the facts versus, tenants are terrible and all they do is trash buildings. Like that's your people are going to tune out like immediately
I'd
with
even
that
go
type
so
of
far,
stuff.
Angela, not to refer them as tenants, residents who choose to rent.
Right. That's also, you notice I've been trying to use housing providers, right? Like
Yep,
some of
exactly.
the language that we use creates this inherent tension from the get-go. Yep. Yep. And educate, right? You know a lot about this business if you're a housing provider. The challenges you face, like, the day-to-day running of this business. And legislators and senators, if they're not in the business, they don't know. Just like I don't know the ins and outs of everything Brian deals with from, a real
Mhm.
estate perspective, right? I can make guesses or, I'm a business owner myself, so, I have a general sense, but, I don't know the day-to-day struggles that realtors are facing or that, real estate companies have. So, educate. Don't assume that they know about your business because they don't. And unless they're in the business, some of them are. Many of them don't advertise it, for sure. A lot of them don't vote like they are. But that's a different problem.
Tempted to say, tell us more, but I don't think you'll go down that path.
No. Nope. Nope, nope. Um, all right. So, unless I don't, Brian, I can't with the screen share on, I can't actually see if there's anything in the Q&A. If people have comments or things they want us to address, uh, drop those down into the Q&A for us, I
I'll
guess
keep that
before.
open for the next because I'm operating, as I mentioned, off my iPad today. But there's no questions in the Q&A, but I will
Okay.
keep it. I'll keep a watch on that for the next few minutes.
Okay. Sounds good. So, couple of updates about court and court process, sort of as we're, looking forward into this, next year. Um, so we talked a bit about the eviction disposition guidelines in December, that the court has those set at 6 months, meaning their goal is to have eviction cases closed within a 6 month window. I will also point out that for the first time since well prior to COVID, we have a fully staffed judiciary, meaning all judicial positions are currently have been filled. Um, so, I think fingers crossed that some of that will also help alleviate some of the what feels like slower process that we've been seeing when we have judges sitting in all of the places that judges are supposed to be sitting. There's not people covering. So we have, judges that are sitting in multiple courts right now, doing like half day here, half day there, you know, full day here, full day there. And so they're um, not in one court all of the time. So I think that could be we'll see what kind of impact that has. It's, too early to tell. But I think it's not going to hurt. If anything, it's going to help. So that's, I think, a positive. I also wanted to, if people had not seen earlier this week, was it earlier this week? Yes, earlier this week. I don't even, maybe it was the end of last week. I didn't even know where we are. WCAX did a story on an eviction. They actually went with the sheriff's department to a lockout. Um, I think it's a really interesting, that's the QR code that'll take you to the WCAX article. I think it's a interesting look. I think that's also something that could be shared with legislators as sort of the other end of that. WCX interviewed like a neighbor who had had to live next to this drug house for 6+ months. They interviewed the owner of the property, which happened to be Champlain Housing Trust. They filmed sort of the actual lockout. So if the sheriff's going to execute a writ of possession at a property that was known to be a drug house in the neighborhood. And so it was I think an interesting look into sort of that piece of this process here. So it's, I think, worth a watch for sure. It's not that long. All right. One more round of the eviction prevention rental assistance program has gone live. It went live in November. Vermont State Housing Authority has been processing applications. I do know that it has been slow. So the review and start to finish is not a fast process, but they are processing processing those. I think what I'm hearing the biggest impediment is tenants not meeting the sustainability requirements for the program, which is tied to, what are they paying for rent and utilities and what's their income and is the property or the unit affordable based on their income. And from what I understand, that is sort of the largest reason for denials for applications to this program. So it's again program designed to cure back rent situations. Um, and they have some eligibility requirements. It's kind of like the VRAP program and then the first program, our HSP program that we had in COVID, sort of got together and they kind of picked things from both of those programs. But it does require that you have a court case. So this isn't one where you can just be like the tenant's behind. But it will cover court costs and attorney's fees as well. So it can make the landlord whole or the housing provider whole if the tenant qualifies. And it's really meant to be tenant gets themselves into a financial situation, can't get out of the hole. They have the ability to pay rent going forward, but they can't just get the back part caught up. So it's
We do have a question. Thank you,
sure.
Sheila. Always great to have you on. Thank you for your attendance. What are they using for parameters of affordability? Do you happen to know, Angela?
It's 40%. So
40% debt
rent,
to income.
so rent and utilities can't be more than 40% of the tenant's income.
Pretty significant.
Yeah. And I think, they are collecting data because if they're seeing, folks that are sort of in that 40 to 50% range and they're getting denied, I think there may be uh, attempts to go back to the legislature because this is a Vermont, like a legislatively
Mm-hmm.
designed program to say, look, we need to expand these parameters a little bit because we're missing this chunk of people who, is it tight to be rent burdened at 50% of your income between rent and utilities? Yes, but if the alternative is you don't have a place to live, what's the trade-off with that? And so I know there's data collection that's happening, but currently the cutoff is 40% for that. First come, first serve. I think there was only like 2.5 million. I meant to check in with folks and find out where they were with those funds and just did not have a chance. So I don't have a sense of how far into that allocation they are for this program at this point. And available till funds are exhausted, which I was hoping to give people an update, but I don't have that. Sorry.
All good. Appreciate it.
And that was the end of my formal presentation.
So informal. What do you know about the feds clamping down on grants, loans, how it's going to affect housing? I read a little bit that it won't affect current payments, but may not see some new applicants for a while. Anything you're aware of on a federal level?
Other than it feels like it's just chaos, no. I think we're all just sort of waiting to see how all of that shakes out in the next few months. So I don't know. I know that it seems programs that were initially shut down and then reopened, like providers or folks can't even get back into those portals. Those are sort of be broader, more
Mm-hmm.
broadly than housing situations. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of anxiety and stress with some of these programs about that. Um, but I think only time will tell, and we don't have good answers or good information right now.
And
So,
Angela, talking about advocating for the housing providers, that's something to raise right then and there too. And that was a question I asked to the city of Winooski last night.
mhm.
Is with all this talk coming out of Washington, shutting down refugee resettlement, shutting or minimizing what people can get for grants and housing, is this really the time to alienate your housing providers?
Right.
Unless of course they want to just buy all our properties and take care of providing housing for free. But yet I digress and shouldn't make those comments.
Right. Well, I mean, there, I at one point, as a joke, said maybe some of these entities does anybody have a property they just want to like give the city to manage to see
Mm.
what's involved? And I think, that's that disconnect, right? Of not understanding all of the effort that goes into managing the relationships in the property, managing the cash flow, managing repairs, neighbor disputes. Like there's a lot of other sort of behind the scenes things that happen on a daily or weekly basis that don't get talked about, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And those, take time, they take energy, and are sort of it's kind of like parenting almost, right? Like all the stuff that you do that, nobody notices unless your kid's not behaving well, and then they notice. So it's kind of like that, I feel like. Uh, but there that is also an option, right? Like if these municipalities
Mhm,
want that, they're free to set this kind of housing up and run it in this fashion and do this. Nothing's stopping them
mhm.
from creating their own housing to offer. It would be an interesting experiment for sure.
I'm walking away from today. One is I'm grateful for all the time that you and the organization put together to update this. I'm walking away, and you guys probably know what I'm going to say. Saying it's probably one of, if not the most important year. Stay aware,
Hmm.
get involved, advocate, be if it's phone calls, if it's letters, or better yet, if you can afford yourself the time to get down to Montpelier when they're talking about this stuff. And all the more reason to make sure you're a member of the Vermont Apartment Owner Association if you're not, so that your advocacy group can better represent you.
Yep.
I'm starting to think I'm going to have to get down and testify, a couple different municipalities in the state. So I'm going to put some time on my calendar to advocate for us.
Yeah, and I think, we're seeing the inventory issue is also getting addressed, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
number of projects and sort of larger scale housing projects that are getting up off the ground and, ground's already been broken. Our occupancy is going to be, later this spring, early summer. And sort of the volume with the changes to the Act 250 permitting requirements and sort of the
Mm-hmm.
easing of some of those, like we're already seeing progress in that regard, from both, rental housing and just non-rental housing, right? Like there's a number of developments around the state that have been getting press for just moving forward. So that's encouraging as well, right? Like there's always a delay when changes are made to the implementation. But kudos to the developers who have sort of hit the ground running with a lot of these Act 250. And there are some projects that were changed, mid cycle when
Mm-hmm.
the restrictions eased and now more units are being added. So I think, good things are coming, I
Well, you
think.
also just brought up another great point. If anybody's advocating with the state or with the towns against, the elimination of no cause eviction, how interested would developers be in developing a town that doesn't allow for, no cause eviction? So that's another key talking point right
Right.
there.
Right. I mean, I have some concerns also that in if these go forward in certain jurisdictions, we're going to see a consolidation of ownership, and
Very
that,
much so.
smaller housing providers, the mom and pops, the, ones that have one or two buildings, they're going to start selling because they're not trying to navigate this new system is not going to be cost effective for them. And so, there's a lot of concern about out-of-state investors or investment firms or, sort of non-Vermont traditional ownership structures. And I think, that sort of regulatory scheme sort of opens the door for those. And, that's not necessarily positive either. We have a pretty
No.
diverse ownership portfolio in the state of Vermont. And I think that's part of what makes our system work.
To all our guests, if you have any additional questions, want to pop them into the Q&A as we're bringing today's session to an end, please go ahead and do so. And I believe, Angela, that you're and I talking about the next couple sessions, possibly doing fair housing a month
Mhm.
early to get everybody fair housed early,
I know.
and then also possibly a hybrid in April with the Chittenden Solid Waste District.
Yep.
And folks, I'm also looking potentially in May to bring some people who study our housing market, so you get a good idea of the trends. And one of those trends, Angela, you touched on it, is a lot of units coming online. So I've heard, forecasts that we're going to move from a 1% give or take vacancy factor to closer to 3. which I think will be good for the long-term stability of the housing in our area.
Right.
Make it a little harder to to rent the units. I noticed Prongwell Property Management, we're showing units a little bit more frequently than we did just 6-7 months ago. So there's some changes, which I think will also slow as people pull back for new round of permitting as interest rates went higher.
Right.
A lot of
Right.
stuff we're seeing come on the market now is permitted, not, was permitted 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Right.
Oh, maybe not four.
Right. But even, 2 and 3, like that lag, that's part of what create drives housing costs up.
Mm-hmm.
Because it shouldn't take that many years to get a
Agreed.
project from
Agreed.
start to break ground. So, yeah,
Yeah. Interesting times.
absolutely. So I think, final call for questions here. And
No questions. So,
okay.
Angela, I can't stress enough. I really appreciate all the time you put into it and giving us a good look at year ahead.
Hmm.
Folks, thank you for making the time to attend and to participate. And again, my personal request of each and every one of you, get involved, advocate for the housing providers as you are one or your brokers on here. And we live in a great state. Now we just have to get involved, keep it, the state that we think is a win-win-win between housing providers, towns, and obviously
Right.
those residents who choose to rent.
Right. It's all about balance.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Angela, thank you very much for all you do.
Thank
Brian
you.
Armstrong, KW Vermont, and Strongwell Property Management. I'll see you guys next month.
Sounds good. See ya.
Take care, folks.